We tend to assume that systems are built to serve all of us, right? That as technology scales up, it somehow gets better at accommodating our unique individual needs. But just look around. Why is it that processes designed to help people almost always end up punishing anyone who's even slightly different? Today's explainer is going to uncover a hidden structural force. We're looking at why perfectly rational decisions inevitably engineer totally unyielding worlds.
Usually, when a system fails to accommodate someone, we just brush it off as a simple oversight. But there's actually a stark contradiction between intention and execution here. The intended design promises universal service, but the structural reality, the actual math executing beneath the surface, does something entirely different. It eliminates the edges.
Let's start with a really basic premise. We like to believe that systems are built for people. We naturally assume they're designed for individuals with unique dimensions, unpredictable variables, and highly specific contexts.
But the moment a system scales up, that premise completely collapses, because systems aren't actually built for people. They're built for averages. As standardization takes over to handle massive volume, the complex, messy reality of an individual is quietly replaced by a mathematical ghost, a statistical composite that, well, doesn't actually exist.
Picture an industrial sorting machine operating at a low, highly efficient capacity. Right in the center sits a metal grate. Now, as items pass over it, the grate catches the most common, uniform objects and processes them smoothly. And for the vast majority of items, it works absolutely perfectly. Section 1. The myth of the mold. Section 2. The pull of the average.
You see, a single rigid mold is physically incapable of accommodating variety. It doesn't adjust to you. It demands that you adjust to it. And to understand why systems behave exactly like this, we have to look at their mathematical reality. The mean is simply the mathematical center of a population. In any large data set, independent variables will inevitably converge toward the center point. So the system uses this mathematical center to define its operations, slowly stripping away anything distinct or unique just to maintain efficiency. Now watch what happens when our physical sorting machine speeds up. The volume increases dramatically. More and more elements are being forced through that exact same unyielding metal grate. There is literally no time for custom processing anymore. Efficiency now demands absolute uniformity.
The normal distribution, which we commonly know as the bell curve, creates this overwhelming systemic preference. It acts almost like a gravitational pull toward the center. If you happen to match the average, the system accelerates your progress. It feels completely seamless. But if you fall even slightly to the left or the right of that center point, the friction begins.
Section 3. The elimination of the edges. As that internal pressure builds, we start to see inevitable consequences for the elements that don't perfectly fit the center. Now, we usually define an outlier as an error or some kind of anomaly. But structurally speaking, an outlier is really just a physical reality that a standardized system cannot process. It's simply a data point the machine has to discard to maintain its speed and survive the sheer volume of inputs. As the system relentlessly optimizes for the mean, our sorting grate hardens. The structural constraints become absolute and entirely unforgiving. There is no longer any flex or give in the metal. The system's rules are permanently locked in place.
So, objects that are slightly too large for the grate don't just sit there. The machine certainly doesn't stop to accommodate them. Instead, they are forcefully modified. They're crushed to fit the acceptable parameters, violently stripped of their original dimensions, just so they can make it through the process.
And what about the ones lacking the required mass? The objects that are slightly too small simply fall right through the cracks. They slip into the gears of the machinery and are completely destroyed by the surrounding structure. The system doesn't even register their loss. It only registers its own continued, localized efficiency. Before we continue, if you are looking for a calmer, much more structured way to stay informed, you might want to look into Sift. It's a news app that focuses only on the most important information, avoiding those endless sensational headlines. You can find it via the link in the description.
Section 4. When measures become targets.
Let's observe this exact structural progression in healthcare, where systems attempt to enforce efficiency through metrics. Step 1. A hospital wants to measure health and efficiency. Step 2. It decides the best way to do this is to measure the length of patient stays, actively working to decrease them. Step 3. The entirely rational local decision to hit this metric inevitably leads to premature discharge. Patients are pushed out early just to satisfy the system's target, which ironically results in a massive increase in emergency readmissions.
This specific structural behavior actually has a name. It's known as Goodhart's Law. Formulated by the British economist Charles Goodhart, the principle is absolute. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
An indicator simply reflects reality, but the exact moment the system uses it to enforce the average, it becomes a target, and targets inevitably distort reality. This phenomenon systematically corrupts scientific evaluation, public policy, and institutional standards. People just begin to game the system to survive the sorting grate.
Section 5. The inevitable structural lock-in.
We now reach the final stage of systemic rigidity, where the process becomes entirely irreversible. The sorting machine is operating at maximum capacity. The internal pressure is overwhelming. Every single local decision happening within the system is entirely rational, aimed purely at keeping the machine from breaking down. There's no malice here, just the crushing force of optimization.
This hardening happens chronologically. In year 1, a standard is introduced as a helpful tool for compatibility and safety. By year 5, what was voluntary becomes a mandate. And by year 10, the standard has transformed into a non-tariff barrier. The lock-in is complete. It is no longer legally or structurally possible to exist outside the mold.
Once that standardization is locked in, competition inherently shifts. Because features are strictly defined by the standard, uniqueness becomes impossible. So competition shifts entirely to price. It forces a brutal race to the bottom, restricting innovation just to produce the cheapest possible average component.
Section 6. Optimization as global failure.
And this brings us to a deeply unsettling realization. The crushing of the large objects, the loss of the small objects, the absolute destruction of the edges was never an accident. When we see systems creating miserable experiences for anyone outside the mathematical center, we naturally assume the system is broken. We look for someone to blame. But look closely at the structural constraints we've uncovered in this explainer today. Rational, local decisions, optimizing for the average, perfectly execute a global failure. So what does this all mean? It means the system was never failing. It was following its structure.